In the vast and ancient halls of the Galactic Council, humanity stood alone. Representatives of thousands of species filled the colossal chamber, their colors and forms blending into a living ocean of judgment. The great tribunal platform rose at the center, a cold monument to the Council's authority. On it stood the human delegation. 3 figures in dark formal suits, their faces calm but their eyes burning with unspoken fury. The accusations had been read aloud for hours. Humanity, the Council said, was too unpredictable, too emotional, too aggressive. They pointed to humanity's wars, to the rapid colonization of nearby systems, to the fierce independence that refused to yield to Council protocols. Humans thrived where others would not dare to set foot. They adapted too fast. They invented too recklessly. They could not be trusted. The High Speaker, a creature of shimmering blue crystal, delivered the final words. Earth and her children are hereby severed from the Galactic Compact. Trade is prohibited. Travel is restricted. Diplomatic recognition is revoked. Let this serve as warning to all. The sentence echoed in the vast hall, hanging in the air like a blade poised to fall. The lead human representative, Ambassador Calla Morgan, remained motionless. She had expected no different. Humanity's pleas had fallen on deaf ears from the start. She turned her gaze across the rows of alien faces, some indifferent, some smug, a few even gleeful. Not one hand had been raised in humanity's defense. Morgan stepped forward, her voice calm, measured. We thank the Council for its honesty. We will not trouble you again. She bowed, a gesture many of the species present no longer used or understood, and turned away. As the humans walked out of the grand hall, the murmurs began. Some whispered about humanity's arrogance. Others pitied them, certain that Earth's isolation would lead to slow ruin. A few watched in silence, unsure if the Council had just made a mistake it would regret for centuries. Outside, the stars burned bright against the black sky of the Council's central world. Morgan looked up, her heart heavy but unbroken. We do not need them, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. One of her aides, a young diplomat named Reyes, nodded. We have always made our own way. As their shuttle lifted off and disappeared into the night, the Council returned to its endless debates and decrees, already forgetting the species it had just cast aside. But on Earth, on Luna, on Mars, the message was received. Not with tears, not with surrender, with resolve. The galaxy had closed its doors. Humanity would build its own. The world of Earth trembled, but it did not break. In the wake of the Galactic Council's decree, despair spread like wildfire through the streets of every major city. Governments crumbled, economies collapsed, and for a moment, humanity seemed lost, adrift in a galaxy that had chosen to turn its back on them. The message was clear: no one wanted them. Humanity was alone. But in that moment of darkness, there were those who refused to accept it. In the quiet corners of the world, in the makeshift government offices, and in the crumbling research labs, something remarkable began to stir. The architects of the future gathered their minds and their courage. Scientists, engineers, and dreamers who had once worked in the shadow of alien technology now turned to build something new, something that could stand on its own. A single idea was shared among them all. Humanity would not perish. They would rise. With the galaxy now closed off from them, humanity's only option was to look inward and outward. The earthbound nations, once rivals, united under a single banner. The world's greatest minds and builders formed the first great project of this new era: the creation of the Orcs, massive, self-sustaining starships capable of carrying human life across the void of space to new worlds, to new hopes. Every available resource was thrown into the construction of these ships. From the bones of the old world came the new dream. Metal, fuel, technology, and ambition fused together into colossal ships capable of reaching the stars. There was no time to waste. The engineers worked day and night, driven by a singular goal: to survive. To prove that humanity could endure, even when the rest of the galaxy had cast them aside. The first Orcs were a testament to human ingenuity, but even as they took shape, the challenges were overwhelming. Many feared that they would never be completed in time, that the ships would never make it beyond Earth's atmosphere. The people on the ground watched as massive construction projects crawled toward their completion, the days slipping by like grains of sand through an hourglass. The world had been in chaos, but the stars beckoned, and as the Orcs neared readiness, humanity began to see the light of a new dawn. The world's desperate eyes turned upward. The future lay not on Earth, but beyond it, and every person, from the wealthy to the poorest, understood that they must rise together or fall apart. As the first Orc, the Hopebringer, lifted off from Earth's surface, a silent cheer spread across the planet. It was not just a victory for a few, but for everyone. It was the first step toward a future that no one could have predicted. Humanity was no longer alone. They were reaching for the stars. The second Orc launched, then the third. Soon, a whole fleet of ships began to streak through the sky, each carrying millions of souls, dreams, cultures, hopes, and fears. They were scattered across space, but their spirit was one. The stars were no longer the domain of the Council. Humanity had reclaimed the sky. The new worlds were not kind. Humanity's first colonies had no welcoming lights, no friendly alien hands to greet them. The planets they found were harsh and unforgiving. There was no gentle cradle in the vastness of space, only the cold indifference of the universe. The first settlers stepped out of their ships to face worlds that seemed designed to destroy them. On Vespera, the ground cracked with volcanic fury, belching molten rock into the sky, while acid rain pummeled everything beneath. The settlers didn't hesitate. They worked in silence, constructing domed cities that could withstand the constant barrage from above. It wasn't safe, but it was theirs. They had nowhere else to go. On Abyssos, the oceans were deep, dark, and full of creatures whose only desire seemed to be consuming everything in their path. The colonies were built on floating platforms, and each day was a battle to keep the waves at bay. Ships sank, settlements were torn apart by violent storms, but they rebuilt over and over. Each loss was a lesson in survival. And then there was Signet, a planet with gravity so heavy that every step felt like an effort to move through molasses. The air was thin, and the dust storms cut through metal like paper. But the settlers didn't shrink from it. They adapted. They engineered machines to harvest the minerals deep underground, to filter the atmosphere, and to make a home where others would have turned away. Every world was a fight. Every world seemed to mock humanity's existence, as though the universe itself was conspiring against them. Yet each time they were knocked down, they got back up. They adapted. They learned. They survived. In the first few decades, the colonies were small, isolated outposts clinging to life in the middle of hostile environments. But humanity's resilience was its greatest strength. They couldn't be beaten by a planet, no matter how unforgiving. And they knew they had to move forward, to grow, to spread. The colonies started to multiply, and with each new settlement, they improved. New technologies were born from necessity. Terraforming machines that could reshape entire ecosystems, drones that worked tirelessly to build, defense systems that were almost as deadly as the planets themselves. But not all of humanity's struggles were against the planets themselves. The other dangers, alien predators, unexplained diseases, and fierce environmental changes, were ever present. One colony on Selene fell to a rapid, contagious virus that wiped out nearly a quarter of the population before it was contained. Another on Ravenna lost contact with the rest of humanity when an alien species, thinking them a threat, attacked without warning. It seemed as if every world tested humanity's will to survive. And yet, with every catastrophe, humanity's spirit only grew stronger. Each world that tried to kill them was simply another challenge to be conquered. They refused to give in to the universe's indifference. In the face of death, humanity became something more than just survivors. They became creators. innovators, builders. The question no longer was if they could survive. It was how much they could endure before they reached a place where no world could stop them. The Orcs were only the beginning. Humanity's true power was in its ability to adapt, to thrive in the face of the impossible. And now they had more than just one world. They had hundreds, each one a testament to their persistence, their refusal to fall. Humanity had no intention of waiting for permission. After decades of surviving the harshest worlds, after carving out a new existence in the void of space, it was clear. They no longer needed the Galactic Council. The decision had already been made, not in council chambers or diplomatic meetings, but in the hearts of millions of human souls across the stars. They were done asking for a place at the table. Humanity would forge its own path. In the capital of their new empire, a world built in the image of Earth's lost cities, but stronger, more resilient, the moment came. It wasn't a coronation, and it wasn't a war. It was something far more enduring, the founding of the Solarian Empire. The leaders who had brought humanity this far gathered in the great hall of Solara Prime, a world now transformed from a barren rock into the beating heart of their new society. It was here that the first of the Solarian oaths was spoken aloud, under the shimmering light of twin suns. The sky above them was a reflection of their newfound strength, bright, bold, unyielding. The oath was simple, but it rang out with a power that could be felt across every colony and every ship that called humanity's new empire home. We swear, on our honor and on the strength of our will, that we will never again bow to those who seek to control us. We are sovereign, we are free, and we shall stand together, united, no matter the cost. It wasn't just words. It was a pact, a promise, a new law that transcended anything humanity had known before. It was the foundation of the Solarian Empire, a realm not built on conquest or submission, but on the relentless spirit of independence that had carried humanity through its darkest moments. The Solarian Empire would not seek to dominate the galaxy. It would simply exist. It would thrive. And it would protect its people at any cost. The oath was sworn by leaders of all backgrounds, from the scientist who had designed the first Ark to the general who had defended colonies from the predators of Avissos. Men and women of every race, of every origin, stood side by side, bound by a singular vision. It was the first time in history that humanity had truly come together, united not by fear, but by the promise of something greater. There were no kings or emperors here. There were only leaders chosen by merit, those who had earned their position through their contributions, their sacrifices, and their unwavering belief in the future. It was a declaration of self-determination, a refusal to be dictated to by any authority, no matter how powerful. Humanity had been cast out by the galaxy, but they would not be broken. The Solarian Empire was not an empire in the traditional sense. There was no throne, no crown. It was an empire of free peoples, of equals, bound by the oath they had sworn together. The name Solarian wasn't just for their capital world. It became a symbol of humanity's resurgence, a banner under which countless species who had once been oppressed, who had once suffered under the rule of the Council, now found refuge. And humanity did not turn them away. The Solarian Oath would be the guiding principle of their empire, a reminder that no matter how far they had come, no matter the distance between the stars, they would never forget the lesson they had learned. The galaxy had turned its back on them, but in doing so, it had awakened something stronger than they had ever known. The will to rise, to build, and to create a future where they could never again be cast aside. The Galactic Council had been confident, too confident. In the years following humanity's exile, they watched with detached curiosity as the Solarian Empire began to rise. At first, they dismissed the humans as little more than a scattered, desperate species, one that would eventually collapse under the weight of its own ambitions. The Council believed that cutting them off from galactic trade, politics, and resources would force them into submission, or worse, extinction. They didn't realize that they had miscalculated the most dangerous trait of all in humanity, their ability to adapt and thrive in the face of adversity. But as time passed, the Council began to notice something unsettling. The human colonies, once fractured and weak, were now flourishing. Solarian ships, once rudimentary, began to outpace their own fleets in speed and efficiency. They crafted weapons that made even the most seasoned military commanders nervous, and they began to spread out into the galaxy with an unsettling confidence. Humanity had turned its exile into strength. Then came the first warning. A small fleet, composed of Solarian ships, entered a neutral zone near the edges of Council-controlled space. At first, the Council didn't take the incursion seriously. After all, the Solarians had no standing army. They were nothing more than a scattered group of colonies. They weren't a threat. But then the fleet activated a series of weapons that no one, not even the most advanced species in the galaxy, had seen before. They struck with precision, crippling a Council patrol that had underestimated their resolve. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer the weak, desperate species they had exiled. The Council's leaders gathered in emergency session. The message had come in from every corner of the galaxy. The Solarians were growing in strength, rapidly. Their ships were sleek, their weapons cutting edge. Their alliances with rebel groups and oppressed species were expanding. The Council leaders exchanged nervous glances as they realized the threat was not only real, but growing. Still, many were unwilling to admit they had made a mistake. To do so would mean acknowledging that they had misjudged humanity, that they had underestimated the spirit of a species that refused to die. But as the Solarian fleets grew bolder, striking at outposts, liberating planets from corrupt regimes, the truth became impossible to ignore. The Council, once so sure of its dominance, had made a grave error. They had underestimated humanity's ability to rise, not just to survive, but to conquer. The first response was diplomatic. An emissary was sent, a representative with an offer of reconciliation. The message was clear. If humanity would agree to reintegrate with the Council, all would be forgiven. But the humans were not interested in reintegration. The days of asking for permission had long passed. Humanity's answer was simple. They didn't need the Council. They never had. Now, the galaxy would have to deal with the Solarians on their own terms. The Solarians were not content to wait any longer. The time for negotiation had passed. The Galactic Council had underestimated them for too long. Now the Solarian Empire would remind them of the cost of such mistakes. It began with a single, precise strike. A planetary defense station on the fringes of the Council's territory, once thought to be a symbol of the Council's unassailable power, was obliterated in a flash. No warning, no demand for surrender, just an explosion that lit up the dark of space, sending shockwaves across the galaxy. The strike was made by a fleet of Solarian ships, ships now equipped with technology that surpassed anything the Council had ever seen. It was a bold move, and its message was clear. Humanity had come to reclaim its place in the galaxy. The Council scrambled in response. High-level meetings were called in the Council's chambers, the tension palpable as the leaders debated their next move. It was only when the intelligence reports came in, showing that the Solarian fleet had not only attacked the defense station, but had also left behind a message, that the full scale of the threat hit home. The message was simple, delivered in multiple languages, but the meaning was undeniable. You left us to die. Now, we return to take what is ours. The message was everywhere, broadcast to the farthest corners of space, reaching the ears of every species that had once been part of the Galactic Compact. It was not just a declaration of war. It was a call to arms, a rallying cry for the oppressed, the forgotten, the ignored. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their future. As the news spread, so did the fear. Worlds that had once been loyal to the Council began to waver. Some whispered of the Solarians' growing power. Some began to question the wisdom of their allegiance to the Council. The very foundations of the Galactic Compact began to shake. The first strike was only the beginning. The Solarians had planned for this moment for years. They had studied the Council's weaknesses, its divisions, and its unwillingness to change. They knew that the Council's arrogance had led them to neglect their own defense, and now humanity would take full advantage of it. The Solarian fleet moved quickly. They didn't wait for reinforcements. They didn't ask for permission. Each strike was swift and devastating. Key military installations were taken out, one by one, leaving the Council scrambling to maintain control. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council found itself in a position it had never imagined. It was losing. The battle for control of the galaxy was no longer theoretical. The Council's military might, once considered insurmountable, was now in question. The Solarians had proved that a species cast aside could rise from the ashes, that they could turn the galaxy on its head and take back what had been denied to them. The Council now had only one choice left: to face humanity's fury or to surrender. But there was no going back. The Solarians had made their first strike, and with it, a new chapter in the history of the galaxy had begun. The Council was on the defensive now. Every move they made was met with retaliation, and their once unshakable hold on the galaxy's power structures was slipping away with each passing day. Solarian ships, fast and deadly, struck at the heart of Council-controlled space. There was no pattern to their attacks, no warning. It was chaos, a force of nature that seemed to appear without notice, leaving only destruction in its wake. Planets that had once enjoyed the protection of the Councils might now found themselves at the mercy of humanity's growing empire. At first, the Council tried to retaliate with all the resources at their disposal. They sent fleets to confront the Solarian forces head-on. But each time, they were repelled with devastating precision. Humanity's ships were built for speed, agility, and firepower, each battle proving that they were no longer the underdogs, but a rising power that could not be ignored. The Solarians weren't just attacking military targets anymore. They struck at the very core of the Council's power, their allies, their supply chains, and their wealth. They made sure every strike was felt, and they made sure the Council's allies knew that there was a cost to standing against humanity. But the Solarians did not engage in wanton destruction. They didn't seek to wipe out civilizations. No, their aim was far more devastating. They were creating a new order, one that the Council had never expected, one built on the principle of sovereignty. A galaxy where species no longer bowed to the will of a central authority, but were free to chart their own course. The Council, realizing the scope of the threat, attempted to rally their allies, many of whom had grown uneasy with the growing Solarian presence. Diplomacy was offered, but the Solarians had already made it clear. They would not be part of the Council's system any longer. The Solarian Empire was not negotiating. It was building something new. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Former Council worlds, once too afraid to defy the might of the Galactic Compact, began to align with the Solarians. They saw in humanity's rise an opportunity to break free from the stifling bureaucracy that had dominated their lives for so long. The Council's promises of protection and prosperity now rang hollow. One by one, planets began to declare their independence. No longer under the thumb of the Council, they joined the Solarian Empire, pledging loyalty to a future of freedom and self-determination. The galaxy was starting to change, and the balance of power was tipping. Now, the Council found itself on the back foot. They could no longer dictate terms. Their military, once the most feared in the galaxy, was crumbling under the relentless push of the Solarian forces. The message was unmistakable. The old order was dying, and the Solarian Empire, with its ideals of independence and self-governance, was here to stay. The galaxy was not the Council's to control anymore. Humanity had become its own power, and the first seeds of a new empire had been planted. The Solarian Empire was no longer a dream. It was a reality. After years of relentless conflict, of skirmishes and strikes, the galaxy stood at the precipice of a new era. The Galactic Council, fractured and weak, could do little more than watch as the Solarians took control of what had once been their domain. And with every passing day, the Empire grew stronger, its reach expanding farther than anyone had dared to imagine. Humanity had risen from the ashes, not with vengeance, but with purpose. They had not sought to conquer. They had sought only freedom. But in their quest to stand tall among the stars, they had built something even greater, a new order, one that could not be undone. On Solara Prime, humanity's capital, the leaders gathered for a moment of reflection. It was a bittersweet victory, for while they had freed themselves from the Council's grip, the cost of war had been immense. Entire worlds had been lost, lives had been sacrificed, and yet the Solarian Empire stood. They had won, not just in battle, but in ideology. The galaxy had seen the truth. Humanity was not a fleeting species, it was a force to be reckoned with. The Council, broken and defeated, had been forced to negotiate terms, but they had no leverage left. The Solarians had taken everything they needed, not just power, but the freedom of the galaxy's people. Now the terms were simple. The Council would cease to exist as a governing body. All former member species were free to join the Solarian Empire on their own terms. No longer would they be controlled by a distant, uncaring authority. The Solarian Empire was built on the principle of sovereignty. Every species was now their own master. As the final decree was signed, a new chapter began for the galaxy. The Solarian banner flew high across dozens of worlds, a symbol of humanity's rise, not just as survivors, but as leaders. The Empire was founded on unity, freedom, and self-determination, and it was a beacon for all those who had long been oppressed. The galaxy was no longer a place of fractured nations and empires. It was a place of cooperation, where each species, no matter its history or past allegiance, could choose its path. There was still much work to be done, but the Solarian Empire had made it clear. No one would be cast aside again. Every world had a voice. Every people had a stake in the future. The dawn of the Solarian Empire was not the end, but a beginning. A new galaxy had emerged, one where the stars were not ruled by an elite few, but by all those who dared to stand together. And humanity, once cast out, now stood as its guiding force. The galaxy had learned one final lesson. You can take everything from humanity, but you cannot take their will to rise. The Empire was just beginning to flourish, and the stars themselves had never looked brighter.